Well, I'll tell you what, right now on Author's Corner, I'm going to introduce you to a really neat guy. His name is Byrne Corbin, and the name of the book is Bibs, Cabbages, and Kings, Lady of the House. Here is this book, and I have had so much fun reading parts and excerpts from it because that's how you can read it. She really was an incredible woman and what a trailblazer. And I'm so glad that I was introduced to her through Byrne. Byrne, thanks for coming on Author's Corner.
So nice to be here, Kate, and you would have loved it too. She would have been a great interview for you too.
Oh,
She just
absolutely. It would have taken hours and we would have
exactly.
gone and had tea and dinner and everything else in
You would have
between.
you would have loved that because you and her share so many different same traits,
As
being
me.
pioneers and trailblazers. I know you've been recognized with a TV Emmy and a few Golden Mics, and she was also recognized uh, so many different awards that she had won throughout her life as being a pioneer and a trailblazer, not only in our famous historic town of Braintree, but in politics as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks for saying that. That's such a huge compliment to me.
You're welcome.
What made you write this book? What made you decide I'm going to tackle this project?
Believe it or not, I found a large envelope with her handwriting on it that said, if I ever decide to write a book, and voila, here it is, Grandma.
Wow. When
Yeah,
you find a large envelope and you start to go through it, were you just amazed at learning about her travels, learning about the legislature, because she was a glass ceiling breaker? What was that like to pour through that?
it was just overwhelming, and seeing I knew she was talented. Remember, she was a columnist for a local newspaper in our town, the Braintree Sunday News. So she wrote for 21 years these wonderful little columns called Cabbages and Kings. Uh, I too shall speak of many things, the walrus said, of shoes and ships and sealing wax of cabbages and kings from Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland. And so she had this incredible command of vocabulary and writing, even from an early age. Her classmates in high school recognized this too. I'd love to show you her yearbook from 1929. And I think if there is such a thing as a Hall of Fame for yearbooks, this one should be in it. She was a one of 26 girls from a Catholic high school in 1929, graduated, and just the way they spoke and her command. But that was one of the things that I found so incredibly interesting. But uh, her writings, that she could turn anything, everyday, uh, ordinary or extraordinary things into a story or a poem where before it never existed. And she, almost encouraged people to, see things a little differently, be more keen, be more observant. And she just amazing gift for writing, I think, is really her talent, as well as another many other things too, to be able to connect with and she loved a challenge. Her middle name was Challenge. She loved a challenge and volunteering. I know you're big with service and mentoring, and she was such a role model for our generation, future generations, to endeavor to achieve their full potential. Is she just loved to encourage people to learn. And even when she wrote, she was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives. She encouraged explaining through her writings the political process that was going on at the time. And as a freshman legislator, even encouraging people to challenge her because she would explain the inner workings of government and challenge people. Maybe, in a couple of years when I'm up, maybe somebody will challenge me. So she loved teaching, and throughout her whole life, she loved to learn. And I think that was an amazing quality one of the amazing qualities she had.
Yeah, and I like the way you take that envelope and you lay it out where you have the dates. So you have the dates of what she's writing. And I picked like one little tiny bit out, which you just mentioned, the legislature. And of
Uh-huh.
course, that's part of the title of the book, right? So 10/20/74.
Uh-huh.
And what's here is Lady in the House, and I'll be a different kind of rep from all the reps you know. To be sure, each day at dawn to the State House I shall go. and I'll sit with all the gray beards. I laughed out loud, and I'll help to make the laws. And when people's rights are threatened, why, I'll champion their cause. And it goes on, and that just sums up what you just told us about this amazing woman.
She had a poem in her part, loved writing poetry, and her readers, not only seeking adventure for her travels as she journeyed across the U.S., Canada, the Canadian Maritimes, Europe, the British Isles, and Ireland, will not be disappointed when they read about her travels and not only, especially those, not only those, but her people that enjoy and appreciate excellent poetry and prose. So she just had a gift for poetry and just flowed any chance to write a poem like just read so beautifully. She would write. She'd love to write about if somebody's retiring, or write about us, or she'd see things through rose-colored glasses. And she wrote a beautiful poem about this day when she walked out her front door, and the driveway was sheathed in ice and snow, and she just thought it was a beautiful day, and she wrote a poem about that. And her outlook and take on life was just, I'd love, for future generations to include her words and included in the fabric of our culture, because her words were so powerful.
For you growing up, did you realize, especially as you got older, that your grandmother was very special?
I had a lot of people come up to me. Is that your grandmother that was grand marshal in the parade, or threw out the ceremonial first pitch at Little League, or rode around town dressed as Abigail Adams in a colonial costume in an open touring car in the middle of winter? And yeah, it was, yes. Usually you expect grandmothers to be at home cooking elaborate Sunday dinners and sewing our pajamas. And she did all that and was this amazing. I don't know how she found time to do it all. It just an amazing, her energy level was just fabulous,
Yeah, off the
incredible.
charts. It's
It
interesting.
was.
You mentioned Abigail Adams. You and I talked off the air, and you were telling me she really had a love for Abigail Adams.
She really did, and that's what drew her to Braintree as a child, growing up in Boston, to move to the historic town of Braintree, Mass. She loved, Abigail, as you know, wrote some of the history's most refreshing and lovely letters. While her husband John was away attending to affairs of the state and founding a new nation as a founding father, uh, she delighted in Abigail's request of John as he dealt with the Declaration of Independence to remember the ladies.
Remember
Yeah.
the ladies.
Yeah, and I love that, but she, devoured books, especially, history and Abigail and John Adams, that's, the importance of having a role model and a mentor, and hopefully some, people will find that in my grandmother.
What surprised you? And this is a tough question because all of it's so amazing, but what surprised you the most in all of the writings that you found?
That how hard she worked at the state house. She would be coming home, doing 24-hour days. It was funny. She wrote in the book how she was coming home at about 5 in the morning, and somebody was walking a dog and, shouted, that must have been some party you went to. And it wasn't a party. She was working all night. And how hard the legislators work, and especially when she was a freshman legislator in the new Dukakis administration, and the Massachusetts economy was in shambles, similar to New York at those times, 1974. And the burden she had, that her mother's heart ached making these decisions to cut things out of the budget, that somebody may not get the care they needed, or their child, or elderly people. So she sought to emphasize, the role of women and mothers in our economy, and in our life and our world, that they and so they were just that's really what impressed me most, was how hard she worked, and not realizing as a young person, all the little things that went into being a state representative
And
and a
what's so
female.
interesting, yeah, and what's so interesting about that too, and you heard when I read that where she mentioned graybeards, she was the first woman. I mean, she really was the trailblazer, but yet she could get along with the men and do what she needed to do.
She did. She, made up her mind. She's not going to fight the men. She's going to work with them. And that's what she did. She really made such a difference. It was funny. She got in trouble once, not in trouble, but somebody picked it up because she could. After a while, when she was in the legislature, she said off the cuff that she could run circles around half the men in there, and she could. And so somebody didn't like the fact that she said that and wrote this letter. That was in the that large envelope that I mentioned that had if I ever decide to write a book. And it was a funny letter because this person, probably a man, took time to write out, that self-praise is no praise, and had this thing, he was kind of complaining about every little thing. And that was one of them, that how she could say that she could run circles around half the men in there. But she admitted that there were different types of characters in the state house. Some were, fumbled for words. Others were eloquent and silky voices. So and great debaters. So she acknowledged that there were some wonderful, comrades and colleagues in the state house.
I mean, it's awesome that you put this book together and you found that envelope. Why do you
Yeah.
think she never did the book?
Well, I think she was so busy being a grandmother, and I think she knew maybe that I would do something like this, and she made it, she organized a lot too, and so a lot of her scrapbooks had these interesting photos. Got millions of photos of her with interesting people, heads of state, presidential candidates, the mayor of Peking, China, and you could see that this reaction that they're squeezing her hand and they're delighted to be with her. She just had that way with people. In fact, I love there's a picture of her, Arthur Fiedler, who was the conductor of the Boston Pops for 40 years, and she got to tell Arthur Fiedler that her father was a structural engineer that worked on the Hatch Shell in Boston, where he performed on the banks of the River Charles, Independence Day free concerts. That was his legacy. Arthur Fiedler is music for the masses, free. And there's a picture of her holding, and they're both delighted. They're like little school kids, and he's got a big smile on her face, and doesn't she. And she was that way with everybody, whether it was the Boy Scouts of America or whatever. In fact, speaking of the Boy Scouts, she was the first female to be awarded the Distinguished Citizen of the Year award by the Boy Scouts of America, another first for females. So this kind of influence she had and service to others was her main thing. She loved doing it. Anytime she could feel like she could help somebody.
Yeah, and by the way, so Bibs, Cabbages and Kings, Lady of the House, you can get this on Amazon or wherever great books are sold. And you
Yeah.
said it, she had, if we go back to what you were talking about initially, which is so cool and why she was so verbose and had a great um, skill, command of the language, is with Cabbages and Kings, she also would be pretty much a glass ceiling breaker there because if you look at the journalism and in Boston and that industry, the newspaper industry, whether it's a local paper, a bigger paper, doesn't matter. There still weren't a lot of women.
There weren't, and unbelievably that she was able to. It didn't phase her that she knew, if she was confident that she could do anything, and that she set her mind to. And even though she was defeated in 1966, she won in 1974, and it didn't phase her. It was interesting when she received the official notification letter from the Secretary of the Commonwealth, being the first female. I love the letter I still have it, begins with the word "Dear Sir." And she was a female, and it like they didn't even take the time to realize. So I know, sir, if you're a sir in England, that's a big honor. So I'll take that as an honor for her being called a sir.
And I grew up in the Northeast and obviously you did too in the Boston area. And I think for other parts of the country too, and other parts of the world, people listening to us, there's something about having that nickname. And so Elizabeth is Bibs.
Yes.
And people called her Bibs.
They did all the time. It was great. And even the Speaker of the House or the governor would call her Bibs. Ted Kennedy, that she sometimes would run into, was Bibs. And it was awesome. Awesome.
Right, because she had that nickname. And speaking of the Kennedys, of course, the Kennedys and how big they are, obviously, in Massachusetts and politics and the history
Mhm.
there. And she writes about, JFK, and she talks about that. And I thought it was very moving in what she had to say there because, again, that legacy, whatever it would have been, was cut short, as we all know. And that was
Mhm.
personal to so many people in Massachusetts.
It was, and she wrote a beautiful poem and story about the year anniversary, so 1964, the first anniversary of his death. And I think I remember as a child, I was a young person, 2 years old, and everybody huddled around the family television set, and people were weeping. And that was my first impression of a parade. And it was his funeral procession. And I remember seeing that, one of my more earlier memories as a young person, with everybody crying, watching his uh, his funeral procession.
Yeah, absolutely. And it obviously touched her as well. And as you get deeper into the book too, where she talks about her travels, and you mentioned that, boy, nothing was off the table. I mean, they went on the road and
She
that was
did.
it. They were going to see everything. So she also had some, I think, and you could tell us, but I think she had some wanderlust that she wanted to see the rest of the world.
She really did. And she traveled with my grandfather, her husband Ted, in a fan trailer that they called Fanny, and they had a 1970 Chevy Impala, and they trailed that. My grandfather was a bus driver for Greyhound for many years. He used to win all kinds of medals for safe driving, and he had a beautiful uniform he used to wear. And so they traveled all over the US and Canada and the maritime provinces in this fan trailer, and some interesting, beautiful. You'll feel like you're right there with her when you read about her adventures and tales. And then not only that, but in Europe too. She traveled to Europe, ducked behind the Berlin Wall, took a train behind East Berlin in the 60s, was on a Russian boat that they felt like, like a James Bond, Ian Fleming's being tailed because they were just as interested in them as they were of her. She traveled with newspaper credentials. So she really got, and plied some of the rangers and the people there that were conducting the tours with questions. And so I think in the book you'll find the story within the story is a lot of her, it'll lead you somewhere else. She'll drop some important names and it's going to make you want to find out who are these people. Sir Walter Scott, Robert Montgomery, and just so many interesting of her travel trailers that you'll feel like you're right there with her. Mount Rushmore was some beautiful. In fact, the director of travel for South Dakota, Miss DJ Klein, wrote to her when a copy of an article came across her desk in 1971, which was, you know, interesting that she just absolutely loved the coverage of how she wrote about Mount Rushmore and the beautiful state. And so her it crossed the whole country that her travel trailers and how her words, you just had an ability to express that wanderlust that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we said at the beginning, you get the envelope and you decide, okay, I'm going to put this together. But it's pretty arduous task. She organized some things for you. Like you said, she
Yeah.
might have known you were going to do this. For you and going through it, and we talked about, wow, it was really interesting. How exciting was it to finish it and actually have this product versus you're busy, you got your family, you have things going on as much as you want to do it. It's just too much of a big thing, but you did it.
It was a labor of love, Kate. It really was. I mean, it just, I felt like I would feel guilty if I didn't do it, to infuse her powerful words into the fabric of our culture. I think it's an important book for a lot of reasons, and to people to study it and learn from it and be inspired, and to, know that the sky's the limit when one of the ingredients for a recipe of successful living. And she kind of had that with enthusiasm, hope, faith to encourage people of future generations, to achieve their full potential. And I think she did that by leading by example.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think she did that for you? I mean, you've had a successful career.
Yes, I've had my own construction business, a subcontractor for 25 years, and but I moved to Florida because she moved to Florida. I followed her from Boston to Pompano Beach, she was just this incredible lady that I absolutely loved. I used to cry whenever I left her home when I was a little kid, and I see that in some of my nieces and nephews, that she had this way that just would connect with you, and I think she did know that I would eventually do this because she used to help me with my homework. Any kind of writing project I had, creative writing, she would be right there offering and would type my homework and just I do think and I feel her presence, but she was just amazing, and she wrote helped create a couple of different books. Braintree, Our Town is a little book that her and her club woman presented. She was a member of all these different women's clubs, and they thought it was a good idea to create this book, being from a famous town of Braintree, Mass, birthplace of John Adams and John Quincy Adams. In this beautiful book she created, Braintree, Our Town. And so she wasn't a stranger to books and creating books, and I think she maybe passed that along to me.
I love it. Perfect place to end this. Wow, just, this book is a treasure. It is.
I'm
It does motivate you. It's very motivating.
Thank you. I definitely feel that, and I know people will really respond to it and enjoy her powerful words. And it's been such a pleasure speaking with you, Kate.
Byrne Corbin, thank
Thank
you
you
so
for having
much.
me. My pleasure.